You've been following this trial pretty close along the way. Obviously, you haven't been in the courtroom. We didn't have cameras in the courtroom. First, give me your 10,000-foot view of this thing. What's your feeling of it? Should this have happened at all? Was this a legitimate trial? Was it a travesty, as I've referred to it? What's your gut level take on this?
The case should not have been filed. It was filed, as I think everybody knows by now, by a district attorney who ran for office and won, promising, among other things, to get Trump. He then passed on this very case, took a lot of heat for doing so, and when Letitia James began to get all the publicity she got for going after Trump, he did a 180 and decided to file this case. The gist of the case is that Trump paid hush money, and that was a crime, and then he tried to cover it up. That's the heart of the case, and as a matter of law, it's wrong. Hush money never is a crime and wasn't this time for really compelling reasons, and those are that this woman paid to keep her secret, had no duty to tell it. She had every right to sell it. She had every right to tell it or sell it. She chose to sell it. Paying her to keep it quiet was not a crime. And if the judge had recognized this, he would have dismissed the case right out of the box.
All right, but let's look at this from somebody that doesn't know anything about the law, somebody that's just looking at this purely from a lay perspective. When you say hush money, that sounds serious, right? I mean, that sounds, I don't know, smarmy, shady. It sounds illegal.
And that's a big part of the problem that Trump had once he was faced with this case. There was an allegation that he had sex with a porn star. He denied it. There was an allegation that he paid her not to tell about sex with him. He denied paying her. He said somebody else was responsible for paying her, and he didn't even know it had happened. So when you're in a case and you have drawn those lines in the sand as he did, I didn't do it, and I didn't pay her, and I didn't know she got paid, the jury, when it hears that story, is going to raise its eyebrows. So he had made a high hill for himself to climb by beginning this case, denying something that most people would think, I don't know about that.
Yeah, this is kind of like the dog bite analogy, right?
Not my dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't get bit, and if you got bit, it wasn't my dog. He's saying, I didn't have sex with this woman, and I didn't pay her to not say I had sex with her. Somebody did, which is fortunate, but it wasn't me.
And by the way, I then did pay him back 2 or 3 times what he paid her.
Yeah, for whatever reason. So it doesn't pass the smell test, but whether he did or didn't have sex with her is of no legal import whatsoever, is the point. Whether you like that fact or whether you don't, paying hush money to somebody to not say something that would reflect poorly on you is not illegal.
Correct. It is not, and it is not illegal when it is done by a political candidate either. And that was where they tried to catch him and call him, say that he was committing election fraud because he was running for office trying to silence someone who had something bad to say about him. But everyone who has ever run for office has gotten together with his supporters and said, look, there's some good news. Let's play that up. And there's some bad news. Let's try to keep the spotlight off that. Let's deflect it. Let's hope it doesn't come out. There's nothing wrong with that. Every candidate does it.
Okay, so let me break that down. And I know I'm drilling down on this because I'm looking at this from a jury standpoint. What is the jury entitled to hear? What they do hear needs to be appropriate to the case, not prejudicial. It needs to be something they're entitled to hear. They need to hear everything they're entitled to hear and nothing they're not entitled to hear. And it needs to be in the right context because the jury, if we believe that the jury system works, then they're not supposed to listen to the radio, watch television, read the newspaper. They're supposed to only judge this based on what's presented in the courtroom. So nothing should be presented that is outside the definitions of the law and what is admissible and what's not admissible. So you're telling us that from a legal standpoint, a candidate has no duty to disclose something that's negative about themselves under election law, common law, any other. They have no duty to be forthcoming about something that's negative about them to the public.
Correct. Nor did she have a duty to tell that tale.
She didn't have a duty and he didn't have a duty. Okay, they didn't violate a duty by withholding this information from the public. So she has a right. She didn't have a duty to tell it, but she has a right to tell it if she wants to. He has a right, or somebody on his team or a friend has a right to go to her and say, we'd rather you not talk about this, and we're willing to compensate you if you won't.
In this case, that's true. And in this case, she had hired a lawyer to try to negotiate a deal with Trump. She believed he was vulnerable running for office. She had a story to tell, and she was the one who initiated the discussion about whether she should be paid or should go public. And Trump responded, as I think many candidates would, and as was entirely legal, by saying, I don't want you telling that tale. And she didn't. So I misstated something there. She didn't talk to Trump. Her lawyer talked to Trump's lawyer. Trump was never in that loop, but that was the essence of it. Her lawyer said to Trump's lawyer, hey, I got a story. Will you pay me not to tell it? And that lawyer said yes.
Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that.
It's not a crime. Here's something that's hard to sell, but it's got to be said. Voters don't have a right to know what your skeletons are. And if you can keep your skeletons hidden as a candidate, you're not committing a crime. You can criticize someone's morality for having had these skeletons in his closet, having done whatever it was that put those skeletons in his closet. But Trump has been convicted for having those skeletons and paying to keep them quiet.
Okay, here's the thing. And we're talking about morality and legality, and those aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And here I'm asking about the legality of it. It's not illegal for him to not tell. It's not illegal for her to accept money to not tell. It's not illegal for someone in his camp to pay her to not tell. That's not illegal.
And it's not only not illegal, it is not election fraud, which is the case that the prosecutors told to the jury, described to the jury. This was election fraud, they said.
Okay, and how is it election fraud? What's their theory?
The prosecution's argument was that the hush money itself was a crime. They just flat said that it was, and that when Trump, in effect, paid blackmail to keep it a secret, he violated New York's election law, which makes it a crime to use an unlawful act to promote somebody's election. So they had to start by saying, okay, that was an unlawful act, paying her. And New York election law made that act a crime because you did it to promote Trump's election. Then they tied it all together by saying, and then you covered it up with business records that misdescribed it, and that business records was used to conceal the fact that you had committed this election fraud crime.
Was it election fraud?
It was not election fraud because the act that they had to have to make it illegal was paying hush money, which is legal.
How did they make the jump from doing a legal act becoming an election fraud?
Mainly by pointing to the evidence of the lengths to which Cohen himself and Trump's organization went to try to hide what had happened in the payment of Stormy. There were a lot of documents that Cohen generated that were unnecessary unless he was trying to hide it. Trump's own people booked the payment as a legal expense, and people have argued that no, it wasn't that. It was hush money.
Okay, so if they had these entries covering up a legal act, what's the problem?
I don't think that Trump's lawyers ever quite said it that clearly. If the act is legal, covering it up can't be illegal. It's that simple. It might have been foolish to cover it up, just as it might have been foolish to do whatever it was that led to the story. But as you said, this was a criminal case, and it somehow went off on the morality of what was going on. And I can see how a jury would be confused by that.
Okay, so if I go in a store and buy something, whatever it is, a pair of socks, pay the money, I got the receipt, I own the socks, and then I go through a lot of machinations to cover up having bought those socks, does buying those socks become illegal?
Well, on the prosecutor's theory, yes, but I think we could come up with a better analogy to make the point.
Well, I'm trying to keep this G-rated here, but the act was not illegal. I'm trying to figure out how covering up something that wasn't illegal makes it illegal.
You're absolutely right. It doesn't. But what the state argued was that Trump created business records that misdescribed what had happened. Trump or his people created those records. And there's a statute in New York that the only one that he was charged with violating, which makes it a crime to falsify business records for the purpose of concealing or committing another crime. So they said that when Trump or his people misdescribed the payment for silence, they were violating this business records statute. That was the argument, and that argument prevailed.